Welcome, everyone. The board meeting of the Board of Education for February 25th, 2020 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Tonight, in addition to voting on the Grant Bowl Master Plan, we will consider the enrollment and program balancing process scope of work, which would direct the superintendent to begin the first phase of this multi-year process. Following the board meeting, we will transition into a work session with the Community Budget Review Committee to review our district student investment account application. At this time, the board will vote on its business agenda. Board members, are there any items you would like to pull for discussion? We can set those aside to vote at the end of the meeting. And Director Brim Edwards, I understand that you have you don't want to pull anything, but you have a couple of questions about 2 items on the business agenda.
Right, so we can go ahead and get it.
Do I have a
moved
motion?
So moved.
Second.
And Director Scott moves, Director Brim Edwards seconds the adoption of the business agenda. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on the business agenda?
No.
Okay, any board discussion?
Yes. So I have 2 items that were in the business agenda that I wanted to, one, ask just a couple questions about one of the contracts, and then I guess make a request about, that comes out of the minutes from the January 24th board meeting that we had, which was a board meeting that lasted about 5 minutes to authorize one student to travel. And it was a special meeting of the board that we had to have to authorize that travel, and it seemed like for one student, that it would be great if we it would be helpful to set, more efficient to set a threshold so that whether it was in the regular business agenda or not, that trips of 1 or fewer than 5, or so whatever the threshold is, that the board not be involved in approving that, because it doesn't seem like it's a field trip if it's one student. And I know Director Scott would probably like to talk about the larger topic of field trips, but I think that maybe having a threshold of when it is we're approving it, because one student traveling does not seem like we should have a.
So have you talked to Director Moore about revisiting the field trip policy and the policy
I have not.
committee?
So I don't know if it's an administrative.
Consider
or you have
yourself talked to.
I'm not sure we need to change the policy. Maybe it's just an administrative issue that we set a threshold so it's more than one student, because I'm sure we have students going all over the place for various educational reasons and we don't approve those.
Okay, we'll
But-
follow.
Can I jump in? Thank you for teeing that up. And I would just add, if we're going to talk about a threshold, I don't think it's appropriate for the board to be approving field trips. I think that is an operational issue. I think we can trust the superintendent and his staff to do their due diligence on field trips. And so I think to the extent we are revisiting this policy, the fact that we've had 2 special board meetings to approve field trips kind of highlights I will use the word absurdity of the board weighing in on school field trips. So I would actually say let's revisit that policy and with the request that we look at potentially stopping that as a practice.
Okay, we will look at what is administrative practice and what is policy, and to the extent that some of that is enshrined in board policy, we'll put it on the list in need of reform.
Great. And then the other, I had a question about a contract that's on the business agenda relating to the FEMLA source, and it's a contract through the original term through June of 2023 for 700 something thousand. It's for the administration of the new Family Medical Leave Act. And so my question was, as part of it, since this is a new contract, it has them building a claim management system to meet the requirements, and my question was whether this system that they're building, if we decided in 3 years or after the original term to switch to a different vendor, whether those are sunk costs that we've paid for, or this is just if we went to another vendor, they would have already had the sunk costs and we could easily switch. I just want to make sure that we're not connecting ourselves to a vendor because of them building a system.
Right, and we have a 30-day termination provision in the contract. The system, of course, it would be certainly difficult to ensure high-quality service to employees with that quick turnaround, and that is our intention. But we would not be tied longer than 30 days to this particular vendor. The claims management system that is referred to in the contract is ensuring that we are compliant with federal and state law, which is one of the big advantages of going with this vendor. And so they already have these claims management systems set up for other clients. They're not going to be creating something unique for us.
Great, so it's not a sunk cost that will connect us to a vendor.
Yes.
So then my other question is around their performance guarantees, which I thought were great to see here. They have some pretty strong quality performance guarantees around responsiveness, that employee contacts, if they contact the vendor, that within 2 business days they'll hear back, respond to complaints within 2 business days, 95% of the time. Really, it's very high quality standards. And my question is, who is going to be monitoring those standards? They also, attribute to the contract management staff here and staff in general, and that if they don't meet the performance standard, there's built-in penalty fees. But my question is, who's going to measure whether they've met those standards? And if there's a penalty, how would that be assessed if they didn't meet the standards that they've agreed to, which are very high?
Right. One of the big advantages of this contract is, of course, that service level provided to employees, which exceeds what we can do in-house. So the monitoring of those performance guarantees and the turnaround commitments that they have made will happen in a couple of different ways. One, our benefits team, so to my right is our Director of Benefits, Lygina Hine, and she and her team will be monitoring the vendor. The vendor will be producing reports, and then we will be doing spot checks and assessments of how they are doing beyond the reports that they provide to us. And then the last sort of check is that we're going to be publishing to employees what they should expect about turnaround, and so we're going to hear if our vendor isn't turning around answers and providing those service levels. And if we hear concerns, then we're going to look into that.
Great.
Yeah.
That's it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. And actually, I think it's just a great standard that's been set in this contract, and just in terms of monitoring the performance and having something to hold the vendor to.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. The board will now vote on Resolution 6052 through 6057. In the business agenda, all in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? The business agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Latterell voting.
Yes.
All right.
So I don't know if I should have declared a conflict of interest, because my household has been subsidizing our art budget for a number of years, and it's really nice to see the beginning to really equitable art funding across the district for supplies. So
I agree.
That's a really positive thing.
I agree.
And PE equipment.
MP,
Yeah,
yep.
yeah.
Okay, before we begin our public comment period, I'd like to review our guidelines. The board thanks the community for taking the time to attend this meeting and to provide your comments to the board. We value public input as it informs our work, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts, reflections, and concerns. Our responsibility as a board is to actively listen without distraction from electronic devices. One quick reminder, any oversized signs need to be in the back foyer, and signs in the audience should not be held in any way that obstruct others' view of the meeting. Board members and the superintendent will not respond to comments or questions during public comment, but our board office will follow up on board-related issues raised during public testimony. Guidelines for public input emphasize respect and consideration of others. We request that complaints about individual employees be directed to the superintendent's office as a personnel matter. If you have additional materials or items you would like to provide the board or superintendent, we ask that you please give them to Board Manager Roseanne Powell to distribute to us. Presenters will have a total of 3 minutes to share your comments. Please begin by stating your name and spelling your last name for the record. During the first 2 minutes of your testimony, a green light will appear. When you have 1 minute remaining, a yellow light will go on. And when your time is up, the red light will go on and a buzzer will sound. We respectfully ask that you conclude your comments at that time. We appreciate your input and thank you for your cooperation. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have any people signed up for student or public comment?
Yes, we have both student and public comment. Hazel Cross and Caroline Racinos.
Ms. Bradshaw, it looks to me like the three students came together. Would it be possible for the three of them to come forward together?
It's as long as it's fine with the board chair.
Is that okay
Sure,
with you, Mr.
yes,
Constance?
yes, thank you. Welcome.
My name is Eliza. My last name is Kerstetter. Kerstetter. Should I start? Okay. Dear Board of Directors, have you ever heard the saying, practice what you preach? I see that you have agreed to the ideas on your Resolution 5272. I'm hoping that you have seriously considered the action steps recommended by PPS Climate Change Justice Committee. But 4 years later, barely any of the resolutions have been acted upon. Don't get me wrong, I applaud you on writing the resolutions and preaching about climate justice, but I'm here today to encourage you to act on those resolutions and practice what you preach. In Resolution 5272, it was requested that by the end of this school year, about 3 months to go, every single PPS building administrator will have attended at least one in-service on climate justice education. From what I know and have heard, there has been no action so far to follow upon this resolution. By teaching the teachers, we teach the kids. Without education, you can't take action. In point 5 of the resolution, the Climate Justice Committee asked the PPS to take action to have metal utensils. At my school, we have silverware because we have parents who have the time and resources to fundraise. Not every school has the resources to supply their own silverware. Just because they can't fundraise doesn't mean they can't have silver utensils. This is something that the district should provide. Starting this equality issue here can start a chain reaction to make our earth a little cleaner. PPS should have made a transition to reusable silverware, but there has been no obvious strides by the district to make the utensils eco-friendly. So unfortunately, while we are talking about climate justice, we are putting single-use plastic forks in the hands of students and giving our money to companies producing plastic pollution. The cost of one metal fork is more than a single-use plastic fork, but in 17 days, the cost evens out. Let's remember, PPS has been running a lot longer than 17 days. It would only make sense to cut the funding for single-use plastic forks and move to metal. Help PPS as a whole be green, and help green in schools can start students on a chain reaction to be green and clean. Buying metal trays will allow our district to invest in the longevity of our world instead of the fossil fuel industry. PPS is a long-lasting school district, so why shouldn't our dishware reflect that? In point 5 of your resolutions, it states that we have asked you to switch all dishware to reusable. We encourage you to make the decision to, instead of buying more plastic, you know will hurt the environment, to buy stainless steel trays. We understand they are a little more expensive, but it will not only help the environment, but show students across PPS the more responsible option. that helping our environment truly matters. You might argue that the metal forks will be thrown away, but I know from experience that if you give students a shot at community service, they will jump on it, giving you a fix for your problem. Thank you.
I'm Hazel, Cross. Okay. Yeah. And these are the plastic utensils by our school, Beverly Cleary, in 1 week collected by a parent volunteer. 170 students. And just imagine what that would be for the entire district. But where is the recycling? And where can I recycle? We have talked about recycling cans at my school, and luckily we have got recycling cans in all rooms, but the front hall and in the cafeteria. But in other schools, they can be harder to find. Why aren't recycling bins as abundant as trash cans? It's eco-friendly and it teaches more sustainable behavior. Students show up with plastic bottles, aluminum, tin, single food cans, plastic tins, and milk cartons every day. This can lower our carbon footprint drastically to have recycling bins available, and not just in cafeterias, but in all classrooms across PPS. But most people don't even know where all the recycling goes. At our school, we put signs on our cans, but we had to print them after students and teachers found the bin signs online. We realized that many teachers were not allowing anything but paper in these bins. One of the worst things anyone could do is throw the wrong thing in the recycling bin. It ruins tons of recycling. And 91% of plastic that is produced is not recycled. Part of this is apathy, part is misinformation, and part is not having access to recycling when needed. Labeling is important because according to Metro, 1 in 4 things thrown in recycling bins are not recyclable. That is unacceptable because containers aren't labeled. This is evident in our gym after weekend sports. Unlabeled recycling bins becomes a trash can, which means that everything can't be recycled because the bin has been contaminated. Even one little bottle lid or plastic utensil can mess up a whole ton of recycling. In our school, we have parent volunteers who can help us compost and tell the students where to put food waste and where to put recycling. But we need something that is more long-term. That parent is not going to stay at this school forever. And in most schools, they don't even have parent volunteers to help with composting. But composting is so important, not all people do it. From what I've heard and researched is that most schools don't compost. This is wrong. Putting food waste in the garbage is one of the worst things you can do. It traps carbon in landfills across the world. But there is a simple solution: composting. Along with recycling cans, composting needs to be implemented in schools. Thank you for your time.
I'm Caroline Recinos, Recinos. Okay. In the cafeteria, there are many food items served that are wrapped in plastic or other non-recyclable or non-biodegradable packaging. Just a few examples include sandwiches wrapped in layers of plastic wrap, bags of baby carrots enclosed in little plastic baggies, and milk cartons. This waste is not as recognized, but just as harmful as the plastic silverware that many schools still use. Plastic silverware takes up 4.4% of the total waste volume at school, whereas plastic packaging takes up 5.5% of waste volume. And if you count milk cartons in the wasteful packaging, which I do, it comes to 60.4% of the total space taken up by cafeteria waste, which is a giant amount of waste. Plastic utensils in schools is a pretty simple issue to resolve, but removing wasteful wrapping on food is more difficult. In plastic-wrapped food, they are wrapped so because of things like hygiene and cost efficiency. Both are very difficult to work around, however, it is possible. There are several options that can minimize plastic waste via plastic-wrapped food. A few such options could include finding compostable/recyclable packaging options, or simply eliminating the wastefully wrapped food. Of course, all of this is inevitably going to have a higher cost than the plastic-wrapped options, but I believe it's worth the investment. It can also be worthwhile to switch to minimal packaging so as to eliminate the expenses of removing non-biodegradable waste. I know that you are all people who want to do what is best for schools, so I hope you will see my perspective and consider thinking about my ideas. One last thing we want to leave you with: when it comes to climate-friendly changes in the school environment, we believe that short-term added cost is outweighed by the long-term benefits. We believe that making investments towards climate justice in school is one of the most beneficial things you can do as PPS board members. Thank you.
Ms. Bradshaw, any other public comment?
Yes. We have Armand Malazzo and Jeff Greer.
Please come on up.
You were called first. I'm a rule follower.
So my name's Armin Milazzo, Milazzo. I'm the parent of an 8th grader, and I will not let my child be a statistic of suicide. Suicide's a real thing in our schools. 2.5 years ago, we brought up some physical bullying that was going on in our kids' school. It's escalated not only through physical but verbal about his physical size, and escalated to suicide encouragement from other students. We had several meetings, lots of words, but no actions. It wasn't until we contacted the superintendent's office that we had another meeting. Again, more words, no actions. Once I contacted the school board, it seemed that some of those actions actually started to make promise, and some of the things that were promised in the past started to happen. The biggest concern right now is that my kid, and I'm sure other kids, aren't telling adults, because I hear things like, well, what's it matter? No actions are taken in school. Nothing's going to happen. It gets worse. The day after I told students, teachers, my student got bullied more because he went and told. How many other kids is this happening to? What are the policies at PPS for this? Why did it take 2.5 years? And God forbid, this is in your hands. This is a real thing. Something needs to be done about it. And I'll keep coming back here until I see more actions taken. This is my child. What other children is this happening to?
Thank you.
Hey there. My name is Jeff Geer. It's Gierer, and I'm a speech language pathologist currently serving Woodlawn School in Northeast Portland. Go Wildcats. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share an urgent concern of mine and my colleagues in PPS speech language pathology. I'd love to be here tonight to talk about the fantastic work your 100-plus colleagues in PPS speech language pathology are doing for the almost 4,500 students and families we serve. I'd love to talk about how we spent the past decade eliminating assessments and practices that over-identified our students, particularly our students of color, for special education services. I'd love to talk about our meaningful relationships with communication science programs at local universities. I'd love to talk up the research your speech-language pathologists have done, or how PPS speech-language pathology became a regional and statewide leader for our culturally and linguistically responsive assessment and intervention practices, but I'm not. I'm also not here to talk in detail about how PPS support for speech-language pathology has been cut to historic lows over the past 2 years, how your speech-language pathologists currently have a class action grievance against the district and special education for an anti-student staffing process, how caseloads are rising, how our national organization is reaching out concerned that we're meeting the ethical obligations of our licenses now because of what PPS special education is asking us to do, or how historically underserved student voices are being marginalized or silenced. Those are all important topics, but my ask tonight is smaller. Historically, PPS speech-language pathologists have been given a tiny amount of additional time to support students who have the most intensive communication needs in our school communities. I'm talking about our students in our special education focused programs. This month, PPS Special Education and Director Mary Mertz announced that students in our focused program classrooms will no longer get protected support from speech-language pathologists, supports our focused program students have received for decades. At Woodlawn, we have 2 focus programs comprised mostly of students of color. My students have feeding needs, use technology to communicate, often require 2-on-1 or 3-on-1 adults to help them be successful learners. My students can't always tell us what they need, or who they are, or what their dreams are, but their voices are super important. The amount of protected FTE for speech-language pathologists to help their voices be heard is already not and has never been enough. It's not what they deserve or what speech-language pathologists like me would love to give them. And now PPS Special Education and Director Mertz are taking that small level of additional support away. I believe our students, their families, and our school communities deserve better than what has been proposed this year. I'm here tonight to urge you to follow your speech-language pathologist's previous staffing practice, and importantly, to protect dedicated communication support for our focus program children, because our students deserve it. Thank you.
We have Jane Comalt and Fred Spada.
Hi, my name is Jane Comalt, C-O-M-E-A-U-L-T. I'm a parent of 2 students at Beverly Cleary School, and I'm here to talk about reconciling PPS operations with climate change and climate justice, and reiterate what you already heard from a few of our students. It's heartening to see progress on Resolution 5272 with climate change and climate justice curriculum development this year, but it's not enough. It's not fair to teach students about the causes of climate change, but then ignore the environmental impact of PPS schools and act like it doesn't matter. We wouldn't teach kids that smoking is bad for your health, but then allow teachers to smoke in the classroom. Why is it okay to teach kids about the causes of climate change, but then carry on sending food scraps to landfills to rot and create methane gas, or serve 4.8 million meals a year with single-use plastic forks and spoons, or use thousands of reams of copy paper made from clear-cutting virgin forests? These are just a few examples of the discrepancy between talk and action within our schools. PPS needs a climate action plan that starts with an operations audit and includes strategies to reduce PPS greenhouse gas emissions, together with funding to implement the plan. I also want to speak about equity. Our school is a relatively affluent one where we have a dedicated group of parents with the privilege of time to volunteer and a can-do attitude among our school administration. So we've been able to introduce reusable silverware and food scrap composting for the lunchroom side of the cafeteria. The amount of volunteer time required for these efforts is not feasible for most schools, nor should it be the responsibility of volunteers to do the work. PPS needs to transition to reusable dishware and composting of all organic waste at all schools, and the responsibility of the work needs to be written into the scope of work of PPS staff. I want to close by coming back to the reason why we're all here, because we care about PPS students. When our principal announced the reusable silverware and composting programs in our school cafeteria, the kids cheered. Totally unprompted, they break out into whoops and applause because they're excited about waste reduction. And they want this, they deserve it. And while I'm delighted that climate change and climate justice curriculum is being introduced across the board, it's obvious that students are finding their learning environment incongruent with their learning. Please help students feel empowered and less anxious about their future by seeing through the commitment you made already in Resolution 5272. And quoting from the resolution, Portland Public Schools recognize that our schools must play a leadership role in modeling for students climate and environmentally friendly practices when it comes to building design, energy use, including the use of solar panels, land use, waste disposal, and composting and recycling. Students continue to advocate for themselves in their future, but it is our job as adults, specifically your job as community leaders charged with decision-making for their future, to start operating PPS schools as though climate change matters. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question of the superintendent. Superintendent Guerrero, given the testimony of the students and the parent, I 2 things I would like to have further discussion on. The students mentioned Metro, which is, of course, the regional government I'm somewhat fond of, and specifically the question about food waste. And so Metro passed a policy for the region requiring commercial food waste to be composted. Portland has adopted that as well. And my question is whether PPS falls under that in terms of commercial food waste, that policy. And I actually don't know if we do or not. And then second, I'd be interested in a more robust conversation about the cost benefit about our single-use plastics and reusables and so forth. I know your staff are looking into that issue. I'm sure that's a constant conversation, but I'd be interested in hearing more about that in the future.
I have a comment about that because I heard Resolution 5272 twice. I manage a small program called Sustainability at Work, and enforcement of food composting is coming to PPS and all other regional schools in about 2 years. Currently, we're working with large generators, hotels, and other hospitals and hotels. But institutions such as all of the schools in the region will have a visit, and will our enforcement for this large generators will start in about 2 years. But we also don't just talk about food composting. We talk about energy use in buildings. We talk about water use. We talk about other operational things that institutions and buildings can do to become more sustainable and to model good practices. Around printing on recycled content paper, looking at a transportation plan for employees, reducing your natural resource use, energy, water, and some of those sorts of operational things. And I think it would be important for us to look at those as well, for cost-saving reasons, if nothing else. Thank you. Go ahead.
My name is Fred Spada, S-P-A-D-A. What I'm talking about today is the transcript destruction problem you guys have with me. I've been fighting with you guys for 4 years regarding it. I've sent you 2 emails to each of you with no response. I've sent a letter now, certified return receipt to each one of you, no response. Now, you guys have cost me my life because of doing what you did back in 1980. Before I even stepped in my first class at Jesuit, you destroyed my transcripts. Now, I've had a problem with it. This has been a 4-year fight. The Oregon Department of Education did an internal investigation, and they found that I'm not an isolated incident. Now, according to OAR 166-400-0060, that's against the state law. You're supposed to maintain those transcripts post-1997, 75 years, pre-1997, 99 years. According to the state archivist, you did break the law. You guys have not fessed up to it, and your superintendent, when I went through your kangaroo court, would not be proactive and deal with it and come up and say, hey, this is unacceptable, we need to deal with this. He avoided it completely. Now, I applied for a job with the IRS straight out of Oregon State University with a business school degree back in 1990, and back then, mass shootings weren't happening in schools, they were happening in post offices, and what's the most hated institution in the U.S.? The IRS. Now, I had an opportunity to get a job with them, and only to find out when I was a finalist to get that job, I didn't pass the background check. Gee. Years later, when I discovered, and only to find out my transcripts were destroyed, I put 2 and 2 together. When they found out that I did not attend any school here at Portland Public Schools, I got eliminated. Now, I've written you guys specifically, and all you do is have me deal with Liz Large on this deal, and I'm sick of it, and I expect you guys as a board to step up and deal with this because you got a problem, and as far as Kate Brown is trying to cover this up. Now, I have not gotten any reply, and I expect you guys to deal with this because obviously this is a problem, and you're trying to cover it up. Now, the transcripts are the basis of the foundation of an education system, and they should be there according to state law, and you guys are not above the law. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jesse Irwin and Alicia Chavez Downing.
Hello, my name is Jesse Irwin, E-R-W-I-N. I'm a school psychologist here at Portland Public Schools, and unfortunately I'm here to echo some of the similar concerns that were brought up by my speech-language pathologist colleagues. Like most of my colleagues who are school psychologists, I work at multiple schools in the district, but I spend most of my days at Vestal Elementary. It's a small but mighty Title I school on Northeast 82nd who's had more than its fair share of adversity this year. I'm so proud to be a part of that school. So I was shocked to learn exactly 1 week ago that my position at Vestal was being cut in half from 4 days to 2 days per week. I initially thought this has got to be a mistake, especially because we have 2 intensive skills center classrooms at Vestal. And as the board now knows, or knew before, students who attend focused classrooms, such as Vestal's ISC, require disproportionate amounts of intervention due to the severity of their medical, cognitive, or behavioral needs. I soon learned there was no error. Rather, there was a change to how school psychologist time was allotted. In the past, much like our SLP colleagues, we received bumps for working at Title I schools or working with schools that had focused classrooms, but rather this year, and without warning, the special education department allocated time based strictly on head counts without regard to the nature and severity of our special education students' needs. The end result of this apples to apples head count is a grossly inequitable distribution of school psychologist time. Under this formula, 13 schools received increases in their school psychologist allotment. Just 2 of these schools were Title I. In contrast, 19 schools had their FTE allotment cut. 11 of these schools were Title I. Schools with focused classrooms disproportionately suffered as well. 6 schools that house focused classrooms received increases, while 14 lost school psych time. To be clear, removing psychologists from schools and focused classrooms, or schools that are Title I or that serve a large percentage of historically underserved students, does not line up with the district's stated equity goals and is not in the best interest of students. It also goes against what staff, parents, and community members have repeatedly asked for at the listening sessions for the Student Success Act. So I'm sitting in front of you pleading for your help to help rectify the situation. My colleagues and I have spent inordinate amounts of time over the past week seeking answers from our superiors only to be met with silence. Psychologists have until 4 p.m. tomorrow to decide whether to stay at their current schools and piecemeal a full-time job by adding a 3rd site. Our other option is to drop our sites with the hope of landing at a school with better allocation. By this time tomorrow, I have to decide whether I will stay at Vestal with my colleagues or start new somewhere else. So please ensure that schools that so often go ignored get access to the school psychologist time they deserve. Thank you.
Did you submit your written copy of your testimony? Or
No,
could you please do so with Roseanne Powell, Board Secretary, or by email? Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name is Alicia Chavez, ALISHACHAVEZ. I am currently a K-2 intensive skills classroom teacher at Atkinson Elementary. I am here today to stand in solidarity with our speech and language pathologists, also known as SLPs. I am deeply disappointed to hear that speech and language pathologists who support classrooms just like mine are experiencing a reduction in FTE. To speak just to my school, our speech pathologist currently has a caseload of 58 students to support, which, to point out, is 8 students over our current contract threshold for SLPs. This is outrageous, and I know high caseloads for SLPs are not just isolated to Atkinson. This caseload includes students in 2 intensive skills programs, K-5, a 1-strand Spanish dual language immersion program, and an English-only neighborhood program. Our speech and language pathologist is not only supporting students bilingually, but is also supporting students who have severe communication disorders, limited communication, augmented and alternative communication device users, and many others. I know as educators we wear many hats during the day, but stretching these individuals so thin that they can't even do their work with fidelity is ridiculous and unjust. Our students deserve so much more than what you as a district are providing them. How can we gather in rooms like this where teachers are forced to advocate for the basic rights that we claim in our policies all children should have? What does this really say to those students and their families? Do you understand the message you are sending with this action? We are constantly talking about retaining educators. But how can you retain highly qualified and educated professionals like SLPs when you continue to staff them as if they are not valuable, or if you continue to overwork them so that there is no possible way they can support our most vulnerable populations? Not only are you consistently violating the contract, but you are breaking decades of past practices to support focused classroom students who need the most support with communication. I am more than happy to host any one of you in my classroom so that you can see the myriad of specialized supports our SLP provides to our students and the time and attention it takes to deliver those supports. I hope as you continue to hear how to best support our most marginalized communities that you will be proactive and honor our PPS vision by using the SSA funds to support underserved communities. honoring school communities like all of our schools, like Rosa Parks, keeping them year-round. Please acknowledge those mistakes and do not keep making them and causing harm. Thank you.
Is that it? Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for your comments. If you haven't done so already, please feel free to connect with our board manager, Roseanne Powell, if you would like to leave a copy of your written testimony for us. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to share your report?
Thank you, Chair Constam. Good evening, everyone. As we find ourselves in the final days of February, energy is still high. Things remain busy here at the central office and in our schools across the district. As you know, we will be heading upstairs later this evening for a work session on our student investment account application. I think many of you likely caught the media story posted yesterday. Thank you, Eder Campuzano or the Oregonian, for your coverage on what we believe is a bold, well-rounded investment package. The overview that will be presented this evening, as well as the more detailed official full application that you've now received, is the culmination of a great deal of work in alignment with our vision, our emerging strategic plan, months of community engagement efforts involving numerous stakeholder groups, including students, families, educators, administrators, and community-based organizations. I think you'll see later, and I think I reviewed some of these themes in our last meeting, that our application addresses a few key themes. Just to list them here again, these emerged after months of engagement. We believe the application to be supportive of these strategic priorities, and we're looking forward to diving into more depth around the specifics with each of these. We are closing on the month of February. Black History, Heritage, and Culture has been celebrated throughout the month here in the Portland Public Schools. A few examples. Roosevelt High School held its 5th annual Hoodies Up event. Cleveland High School welcomed Portland City Commissioner Joanne Hardesty to its Black History Month assembly. Students at Grant High School raised the Black Lives Matter flag in front of their school, and local media has spotlighted a number of our Black educators and administrators, including Principal Curtis Wilson at Benson, James McGee, AP at Lincoln, and first grade teachers at Woodlawn, Anthony Lowry and Lionel Clegg. Learning Black history is increasingly an integrated part of our lesson plans throughout the district year-round. And in February, schools have focused intensively on it. Here are some additional examples. At Cesar Chavez K-8, middle school level students read books about Black history to K-5 students. At Riki Elementary, there was conducted a freedom fighter multimedia art project by 4th and 5th graders. Dunaway Elementary studied Vanport as part of Portland's history and the exclusion laws of the 1840s. Robert Gray Middle School launched and established a Black student union. Students everywhere learned about the life of Dr. Martin Luther King and studied the civil rights movement, and other classroom lessons, including read-alouds, videos of speeches, and documentary presentations were part of students' learning. Schools have held marches to support Black Lives Matter and hosted mobile museums. Schools have hosted Black Brilliance celebrations, and school librarians have supported Read a Book by a Black Author programs as well. As you can see, these are many examples of ways that our educators are placing a focus on Black history in February. We've done our best to keep track of everything. You can find details about some of the events that I just mentioned and many more by visiting our website, pps.net. If you click on this photo on the homepage, you'll be taken to a pretty comprehensive list of school events and celebrations, videos, and media coverage. And if you've not been able to attend a Black History Month event at one of our schools, you'll find on our webpage that there are still a few events remaining between now and the end of the week, and hope to see you at some of those. There's also other events, just as a public service announcement, that we do publish on a monthly basis on our website, and that includes our student arts performances and events. You can find a full calendar at ppsarts.com. In fact, we're just entering our spring musical season at our high schools. Roosevelt was just highlighted in the Oregonian for their upcoming show, Bring It On. And we will have our annual State of the Arts report at an upcoming board meeting, so stay tuned for that. And that concludes my very brief remarks this evening.
Thank you very much. Student Representative Ladverell, do you have a report for us tonight?
Yes, it's also short. Just wanted to announce that the District Student Council is going to be doing our annual Student Summit in May. We're planning on having it at Benson High School. We also heard from Dr. Davis and Nicole Berg around the climate justice and climate change curriculum, and so I thought I would give a little plug to that they're doing design teams at each of the high schools for that curriculum, and that Cleveland, Lincoln, Pioneer, Roosevelt, Wilson, Jefferson, and MLC, and then no, I didn't mean to write that, never mind. All need students to help with those curriculums. It's such a cool thing that we're getting to do, especially coming from, I experienced climate curriculum since I went to Sunnyside Environmental School, so seeing that at high schools is gonna be really cool. Even though I won't be there, it's okay. And then there's also a youth climate mixer that's going on this coming Monday at Roosevelt from 4:30 to 6:30 if students are wanting to get involved. I wanted to give a little update about search and seizure engagement because that's something I've been really involved with throughout the year. Our engagement team has been doing engagement with students around the 3 aspects that were most important to students, which were parental consent and presence during police interviews, documentation, and tracking systems for reporting, and then the language to limit bias and interpretation of reasonable suspicion. And that's been happening through the middle school GSA summit that happened last week. I just saw my face on the screen. I don't like it. The International Youth, thanks. It's just kind of jarring. The International Youth Leadership Conference that's happening this week, and then also by going to specific schools and hearing from students. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Maxine. All right, we now have a first reading of our revised diploma requirements policy. Director Moore, would you like to introduce this item?
The policy committee looked at making some revisions to the existing diploma requirements in order to come into compliance with some new legislation that was passed during the last legislative session. The changes are relatively minor, but important. Is Mary Kane here by any chance? Okay. So if anybody, I'm going to point people in your direction in case anybody has any questions. The changes will not feel particularly substantive to students. These are mostly kind of detailed internal issues that we had to change around the language. So, there you go.
Not too juicy is what you're trying to say?
It's necessary, but not scintillating.
Okay, so these proposed policy amendments will be posted on the board website today, and the public comment period is 21 days. So the last day to comment will be March 17th. The board will hold a second reading of the policy at our meeting on the 17th.
So, Chair Constam, I just wanted to note that I think this is the first time during my third year that we actually are now proactively getting after changing policies as statutes change. And so just recognize that process improvement and the staff starting to get into a rhythm of, as statutes change, that our policies change to reflect those statutory changes. So just want to shout out to staff and that keep going.
There's a lot more of that to come. Okay, thank you very much. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this next item on the proposed scope of work for the enrollment balancing?
Yes, I'll introduce Deputy Superintendent Claire Hertz. As the board knows, we've spent some time iterating and collaborating on defining a scope of work, and so she's going to give a little context so our public is aware of the parameters that are evolving here.
Sure. So thank you for bringing this forward tonight. This will really help us get the process started later this spring. So after review and study of previous processes on enrollment balancing, including SACIT and DBRAG, our district-wide plan includes comprehensive analysis that will be implemented in segments, and we'll have a report to you by the end of March. Prior to the start of our segmented work. The implementation includes looking at ramifications of adjoining areas and the district as a whole. We are being thoughtful and planful and anticipating implications of other areas as we work on a single area. So this is just we've made some additional changes based on suggestions from our last work session, and I bring that before you tonight for your approval.
All right, thank you very much. We'll get the motion on the table and see if we have discussion. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Director Scott moves and Director Lowry seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 6059, Enrollment and Program Balancing Process Scope of Work. Is there any board discussion on this resolution?
Oh, just a question. I'm sorry, you said the report to the board in March of next year, or
No,
next month?
This month, yeah.
And
This spring, yeah.
And it's a report on.
It's the comprehensive data analysis of the whole district and about the implications of the problem areas where we need to do our work based on our outcome goals in our scope of work.
So we received, I think, some information, I can't remember if it was in the committee or the full board, already on sort of where there were schools that were over-enrolled and schools that were under-enrolled. Is that, so this is building on that? Is this the whole data set?
Yes, this will be more in-depth and we'll have narrative associated. We've given you certainly charts and maps and such in previous meetings, but this will be a comprehensive report.
And I think that was the key takeaway from our work session last week, was that we will have this underlying analysis for the whole district, and then we'll begin the implementation work in phases, starting with figuring out feeder patterns for our wonderful new Kellogg Middle School. Any further discussion?
So just a further question, just for community members in Southeast, since that's sort of it's district-wide, but starting in the southeast quadrant around Kellogg and the potential of another middle school. What's the best way for people to, parents and families and students, to like follow what's happening in the process, or to engage if they have a point of view? Like, will there be some more than webpage, or are we going to communicate to the school communities that potentially are going to be impacted, or what will that look like for people who have interest?
So we have a district website that's dedicated specifically for this process, and we've already started posting with the work sessions in this scope of work drafts. So we're starting with the oldest work at the bottom, and as new, each time we have a meeting or additional work on it, then it's going on to the top of the webpage. So it'll continue to grow throughout the whole process. We also will have coming out soon an application process for, we'll be looking for parent and community representation specifically for the schools in the Southeast that will be involved in the first segment.
And then just because I know sometimes when there's lots of stuff going on with when you've got multiple kids or just one child in school, that it may not sort of dawn on you to go to the district website. Is there going to be communication to the impacted school communities?
It's coming out next Tuesday's Pulse.
Awesome.
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question about the website. Is that an interactive website where the public could engage, by submitting a comment?
Yes,
as plans, are put online?
So right now, there is a link to submit a question or get additional information, but we'll have we have an extensive community engagement plan that I think we brought before you
Yes.
in draft mode previously, but it does carry all the way through November.
Excellent. And then also, is there a way to translate into other, like the top languages, the harbor language, safe harbor languages on the website? Or it's something I've looked into for my own work.
As we're sending out the information for the southeast area, we'll be, our applications for the process and the information is being translated into the main languages that we do on a regular basis at PPS.
Okay, but on the website, is there a way to, let's say you're a Russian speaker, is there a way on our website to?
I don't have the answer at this minute, but we'll get it for you.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So we had I think, a really good conversation last week and heard some good testimony as well. And I guess I want to sort of just make sure I'm capturing sort of the issue here. My sense of this is that, the approach that the district is talking about is doing sort of this comprehensive look at where the problem areas are, but then implementing by zone. One of the things we heard from some parents and community members, and I've gotten some emails as well, is this concern that approach may limit, by the time we get to the end, what the options are. And we discussed that a little bit at the last session. And it seems like the trade-off there is that if we were to sort of do the entire comprehensive plan before implementing, we're looking at a couple of years out, and we've got a middle school opening, we've got to deal with access. So from a public policy perspective, I find it both interesting and challenging, right? In terms of, I can see pros and cons on both of this. Can you talk a little bit about the process you're putting in place? So when we're talking specifically about access, when we're talking about this opening middle school, when we're talking about, getting, starting in the southeast, going north, northeast, and then west side, what are you doing to avoid the problems of getting to the end and then realizing that you've already redistricted 2 areas, you've got another area that's being redistricted, and you've limited your options?
So with the district-wide analysis report that comes out, we'll identify what we have in each region and what needs to occur to, whether it's under enrollment, over enrollment, co-location of programs. It's all the responding to the outcome goals in the state scope of work. So we have identified across the district what those issues are. And so as we look at, as an example, with Southeast, where we're starting, there are, we're looking at what schools overlap between the north and the south, and what would, so as you're looking at co-location of programs, you'd say, is there a Spanish immersion just to the north of where we've stopped with Southeast? Is that something we need to consider? As we're looking at opening several middle schools in the Southeast, we also look at what is the middle school enrollment balance just to the north of where the Southeast area stops, and do we need to look at continuing in the second year to complete filling that middle school to accommodate the correct enrollment and get a balance across the whole district. And we're also looking at also the high school level. So it is in all levels, we're looking across, even though we're doing it in segments, we're looking across the area for any overlapping issues that need to be addressed at the same time.
I got a specific question from some access parents, because it's noted in here that access is one of the issues that we need to deal with, and I think we'll go early. And their question was, does that mean access is limited to finding space in Southeast, or is the
Not
district
necessarily.
looking at a citywide or district-wide approach?
We're looking at a district-wide approach for that.
Thank you.
So I was one of the people who had lots of questions last week. And what I was looking for was clarification that we're going to be starting with a district-wide comprehensive analysis. And that that analysis will identify areas that are going to require some work to address the problems of over or under enrollment. But those areas that have issues, we're going to be looking at each of those in terms of the district, or the district as a whole, so that before we start implementing, and that the implementation has to be phased, mostly because it's going to be very complicated. It's going to be very labor intensive and time intensive and community engagement intensive, so we can't do all of it at once. But even as we implement changes in a particular region, that's being done with a clear understanding of the implications that any changes will have on surrounding areas and the larger district. That's what I was looking at last week, and I'm satisfied that the comprehensive analysis that we're going to get is going to highlight all of that. So I'm going to vote yes on this revised scope, and I'm looking forward to the comprehensive analysis that is being done by Flow. So those of you who've been wondering what Flow has been doing, this is one of the things they've been doing. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see what is identified as areas within the district that are going to require some work. I think a lot of us already know what some of those are, but we may find out there are other things going on. And I'm looking forward to actually tackling this work, even if it's going to take a few years to get it done. This work has been pending within PPS for a very long time, a very, very long time. And I think it's going to produce more efficient use of our facilities, and that means that we're going to be able to provide better learning environments for all of our students. And it's going to address some of the really persistent inequities that have plagued schools in this district for a very long time. So I'm looking forward to starting the work, and thank you for moving this. I appreciate it.
Thank you for that eloquent summary. Director Moore, do we have any other discussion?
Yes. Claire's giving me a look right now. I don't understand why. This is an issue I've been dancing with for quite a while. Will be happy to vote yes on the scope of work, looking at all the things that others have echoed. And I do want to come back to Director Scott's point. We do have to have boundaries by next January at the latest for Kellogg, and that's just the way it is. I've been the holdout for doing the boundaries all at once. So I do want to say my big caveat with all this is we take the Southeast Study area, and that hasn't been officially determined yet, but for example, it's likely that Vestal School will be there. Vestal needs a bigger catchment area, and it abuts a number of schools. If we artificially draw a line around it and say we're only going to impact the boundaries south of Vestal, if Vestal's as far north as we go, and I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I'm just throwing that out there, then we've constrained things. And so Vestal needs an adjustment. It's on the boundary. You go across the boundary, there's other schools that immediately probably abut that, whatever that southeast area is, that need adjustments. And so you're introducing a constraint in terms of, in phase 2, do we only adjust outward and not inward? And I don't know if that will lead us to some thorny issues and force us to come back and revisit some of those boundaries that we drew in Southeast. It may be there's enough flex because we don't have to hit every school at the exact perfect enrollment, because we know enrollments change every year anyway. We're looking for hopefully something close to, and I don't know if it's a 90% capacity average, whatever that is, and we can flex around that and still be pretty good to that ideal. I don't know if we're going to end up, when we get to Northeast and whatever parts aren't part of that initial cohort of schools that we look at, if we're going to run into that issue or not. And that's my worry, is that we rebound and go, hey, and have to go back and redraw some boundaries that we just drew a year ago. So that's my worry. And I know, when we look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. School, which needs a bigger boundary, there's a whole ripple effect. How far that ripple effect will ripple in terms of across the geography, I don't know, but it's there's going to be a bunch of those. So that's my worry. I've resigned myself to, the timeline is what it is. We have to have some boundaries for Kellogg and that area going forward. But that's my fear, and this is a case for me of, let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, or whatever it is. This is work that I've been waiting 10 years to be done, and done well, and I think we're going to come as close to that as we can in this process. So I appreciate y'all putting up with me as we've gone through this process, and I'll leave it at that.
Well, actually, I want to recognize you for your leadership on this issue, and you've worked really collaboratively with Deputy Superintendent Hertz and also Director Moore, because of the intersection with the policy work that we need to do to make this all happen. So thanks to both of you, and you got the last word.
So I'm banking on this comprehensive district-wide analysis to highlight a lot of the issues that you've talked about, so that we won't end up being in a position where we have to undo something we just did. That's the whole point of doing it district-wide. And frankly, I've been doing this 15 years, so there. We
you weren't on DBRAC. Let's just leave it at that.
Right. A lot of the, here's my guess. My guess is those of us who have been, deep in these weeds for a while, I will be surprised if we're surprised. I think a lot of the issues are knowable and known already. And I'm banking on the idea that we're going to be having this comprehensive view that's going to be, logical and rational, and we'll be looking ahead to how all of these puzzle pieces need to fit together. There comes a point we just got to do it, and we are well past that time. So
that's why I'm voting yes.
I'm looking forward to this starting. And thank you for putting up with me as well. I appreciate your indulgence.
I couldn't do the work without you, for sure. And it's definitely a Rubik's Cube, and I always liked them as a child, so luckily. So here we go as a group, so thank you.
So I had one last question and then just a comment. So my last question is, under the outcome goals, it talks about the issues of the portables, and that from just the standpoint of the district, that's something that we want to reduce the use and need for the portables. And can you just speak briefly about how this is going to intersect with the bond? Because when I read that, it looks like, it seems like, well, that means we be having investments in permanent structures or something, because we have portables because we don't have permanent structures. Do you anticipate that any of this is going to feed into the 2020 bond? I mean, if not, how would we do it? Because if we're not going to have another bond, say, until 2028. So can you just speak to that, how we'd address that?
So one of the things that we brought to you in data was how the average age of the portables at each school site. I was shocked at the average age of some of our portables. Yeah. You know, they have lived longer than my grandmother lived, right? So it's,
They're not very portable.
Right, they are not. And I would say they need, the ones that are 80 years old need to be removed. So we need to make sure that we're doing our best to use the facilities we have to a good capacity and avoid using portables in the future. They're expensive. They don't last as long. They're not connected to the school. There's a lot of reasons not to use them. It's what we have, so we're going to use them. But the ones that are really old, it's time to get them off the site and then have more open ground at our schools instead of becoming an old building just staying there. So really talking to our facilities team, our chief operations officer, about how we approach some of that, especially the really old ones, getting them out. And with a goal, as we're looking at this, are there times that we want to really work towards maximizing the whole school that's connected rather than out to portables?
So it may be a removal and not a replace, and it may not be a new building, but it may be how do we use our current school footprint more effectively. Okay. And then that was the last of my questions, but I guess I wanted to just thank the superintendent and board and staff for recognizing that there are a lot of longstanding issues in outer Southeast that need to be approached. And while it's not always the best thing to be first, sometimes it's a learning process when you enter into it. I feel like it's been a long time coming for some adjustments that need to be made in outer Southeast, and looking forward to hopefully a robust community conversation about their future. So thank you.
So somebody just texted me a question about the scope of work. So I thought it might be just useful to run through the 3 outcome goals for what we're doing here real quickly.
Sure.
I could do that. One is to optimize the use of our facilities. So we have schools that are overcrowded, some that are under-enrolled, to the detriment of both. And as Director Brim Edwards just referenced, we have portables in some buildings. We'd like to minimize the use of those. And especially going forward, like avoid having to come up with new portables due to an unanticipated overcrowding. A second thing is to support equitable programming. For some areas, that's going to mean shifting from a K-8 to a K-5 in middle school grade configuration. We also want to leave open the option of looking at some K-8 configurations for a whole dual language immersion school. That may be an optimal educational configuration. And third is to minimize program co-locations, where we essentially have 2 programs in a school. Sometimes that's dual language immersion and a quote neighborhood side. Sometimes that's has to do with a focus option. So to minimize those, because in a number of schools, the reality on the ground is problematic in terms of the education of our children.
Thank you. And of course, the materials for the proposed scope of work is posted with tonight's meeting materials. All right, the board will now vote on Resolution 6059. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? Resolution 6059 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Latterell voting.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this next item regarding the Grant Bowl?
Yes, we're going to have our Chief Operating Officer, Dan Young, and team come down while he's making his way. The next item on the agenda for your consideration and vote is the specifically Grant Bowl Master Plan. I want to acknowledge Principal Carol Campbell is here in the audience. Mr. Dan Young will share with you what our best thinking and recommendation is at this point.
Okay. Thank you. Good evening, Chair Constam, directors, and superintendent. With me tonight, I have Marina Cresswell, who's the Senior Director of OSM, and I have Jamie Hurd, Project Manager, with us also. I will do a quick overview, and then we will happily answer any questions that you may have. In your packets tonight, you will find a staff report and resolution regarding the Grant Bowl Master Plan. In 2018, staff and the board looked at 4 options for where to place the Grant softball field. At that time, the option with the softball field in the Grant Bowl was selected. Master planning proceeded after that point in time. During the master planning effort, there was an alternate plan that was developed that included the development of the Grant Bowl and the softball field next to the baseball field up on the upper field. That ended up becoming the preferred option. That option was presented and recommended to the School Improvement Bond Committee 2 weeks ago, and staff recommended a phased approach of completing the softball field in phase 1 and completing the rest of the improvements as part of a phase 2 at a later date. And the committee agreed with that recommendation. So with that, we will happily answer any questions that you may have.
All right, the board will now consider Resolution 6058, authorizing the Grant Bowl Master Plan. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director Bailey moves and Director Brim Edwards seconds the motion to adopt Resolution 6058. Ms. Bradshaw, is there a public comment on this resolution?
Yes. Debbie Ingolstad and Ken Peterson.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Debbie Ingolstad, Engelstad. Behind me, where'd you go, Olivia? Is Olivia Dunn. She's one of my players at Grant High School. She came up here in case the coach falters. So here we go. Good evening, board members, and thank you for your time and energy. I'm currently a teacher for the last 32 years at Grant High School. I also have coached 3 years of basketball, 21 years of soccer, and in my 34th year of coaching softball. I also went to Grant.
Okay, just a minute. That's pretty awesome. That's amazing.
I have some of my...
You must have started when you were 10.
Oh, it gets worse here. I also went to Grant, played soccer and softball at Grant. So except for the 4 years I was in college, I've never actually left Grant. But with that being said, I am passionate about Grant High School, obviously, my teaching and my coaching. Coaching gives us a unique experience with the students we teach, the relationships you build, the community, and the empowerment that you impart on our often overlooked athletes. So when it comes to inequities, I feel I am obligated to practice what I preach, and speak up, because it is for the far bigger cause than just myself and my program. Most of my coaching career, I've been fighting, advocating, and talking with those who would listen about an on-campus softball field. It was drawn into the plans many years ago with the upgrades made to the park fields, but was quickly erased from the plans as it was deemed an addition and not an upgrade. It made sense at the time, and there continued to be conversations about it happening in the future. With the Grant High School remodel, there was no doubt in my mind that the future was here. The time was now, and that was over 4 years ago when we started that. As the construction got underway in the remodel process, it once again became apparent that it was not to be. The plans for the baseball field remained, but the plans for the softball field were erased. I was told that another solution would be found. In the meantime, my players got to experience playing on the brand new on-campus Roosevelt Field. The student body and community support were overwhelming. The softball team was playing right outside the doors of their school. My determination to continue the battle for the field, I just determined was the right thing to do. The heartache that my players, coaching staff, and the softball community that was supporting us in this effort felt watching the construction of the beautiful baseball field as we continued to practice and play at the football striped T-ball field in the bowl. We were torn as our baseball team also deserved a field, but again, we had been overlooked. For many years, this has been a roller coaster of it will happen, oh sorry it won't, and back again. It is my hope that this is the time, and it is for real this time, and the process of constructing a field can start without delay. But forgive me for my apprehension, as this has been a long road, and I have to see it to believe it. Thank you for your time tonight and all the good work you do for our students in PPS.
Thank you.
Good evening. Excuse me. My name is Ken Peterson, Peterson, and I am President and Land Use Chair for the Grant Park Neighborhood Association. Both Grant High School, pardon me, and Grant Park fall within our neighborhood borders. I appreciate the opportunity to address the school board concerning the current request for approval of the Grant Bowl Alternate Master Plan. At the outset, I want to make it very clear that my appearance here tonight should not be construed either as an express or implied statement of opposition to the plan in any way. Given the very short time between completion of the proposed plan by Bora Architects in a document dated February 7th, 2020, and tonight's board meeting less than 3 weeks later, it was not possible for our board to consider the plan prior to this meeting. The Neighborhood Association learned about the plan on February 17th only as a result of an inquiry received from a Grant Park resident addressed to us on our website, rather than being directly informed by Portland Public Schools. To my knowledge, PPS did nothing proactive to publicize the latest and final plan to the community, and GPNA believes that was a mistake. Although there had been prior information shared and well-attended public meetings about Grant Bowl modernization, the plan contained in Bora's very recent report was the first detailed disclosure of the latest plan and the significant proposed changes involving the upper field. In particular, the plan involves adding 6 light stanchions to the 4 previously proposed for the bowl itself, for a total of 10, moving the southern boundary of the field about 20 feet closer to residences bordering the field on U.S. Grant Place, and removing and replacing fencing that was installed as part of the recently completed Grant High School renovation less than a year ago. Grant Park Neighborhood Association believes that before the board votes on the plan, there should be an additional well-publicized public forum organized and held by Portland Public Schools to present plan details and allow Grant Park neighborhood and other interested residents to make inquiries about the impact of the proposed upper field changes. This need not involve a significant delay, and such a meeting could likely be scheduled and completed by the time of the board's meeting on March 17th if it were promptly organized. Our neighborhood association requests that a vote by the board be postponed pending the occurrence of such a meeting. And I want to add that our board is fully supportive of adding the girls' softball field. It's not an issue for us in any way. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions anyone may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Coach.
All right, we have David Petka.
Welcome.
Good evening. I am David Pietka. I live across the street from the scoreboard. I live across the street from the proposed softball field. As a neighbor, as a person that's going to look right out onto the field, I am absolutely not opposed to the softball people coming, bringing the softball back to the field. That is not an issue at all. We want softball on the field, and we want 3 things, though. All we have asked for as neighbors is a study showing the increased use by students proving the need for lights by season and hours. We have asked that the park department not be allowed to extend the use of the field with lights beyond the use by the students. And we're looking for a mitigation strategy, whether that is landscaping, whether it is control of the lights by hours. And I have asked for this many times to the staff at the community meetings. They have, to date, I don't want to use this word too strongly, refused, I use that word strongly, to address the hours. So, one thing I did was, and I sent everybody a memo, I said, please note, in the 2020 spring athletic season, starting March 2nd, and that's when they can start practicing, the sun sets at 6:15. On March 8th, daylight savings time kicks in, and it is now setting at 7:08. Assuming 2-hour practices, 2 hours for boys and 2 hours for the ladies, over 90% of the season, the athletes will not need lights. Reasonable analysis suggests that expenditure of $500,000 for lights to avoid 1 week of field sharing is problematic. However, the staff should also do exactly the same thing that I just did for the fall season, because there could be demand in the fall. So, I want to be extremely clear. I love the coach. She is special. She gives extra time. I want the softball team back on the campus. All I'm asking for is a study showing the increased use, not have the parks use it beyond the students' use, and a mitigation strategy. Thank you very much.
Any further comment? Any additional board discussion on this matter? Questions?
Yeah, I'd like to have staff answer a couple of questions. So I think what we're hearing is really broad support for the concept, and all I can say is thank goodness, because the idea of the track and softball team flip-flopping practices and going late was just not going to work. So I think everybody's pretty happy with that. We have two questions raised by people who testified. One is sort of a due process for engaging with the neighborhood association, and the request to delay things for roughly a month. Well, actually, a couple of weeks. So starting with that is question number one. Is that going to materially impact us in any way in terms of the work to be done?
Would you mind if we discuss the community engagement process first, so we can at least give you some perspective on what community engagement occurred already?
Please.
And I think I'm going to pile on my question so that you can integrate your response, which is describe what is already planned to occur as part of the additional conditional use process.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jamie Hurd, for those of you who I haven't met yet, H-U-R-D. We were directed from the Office of School Modernization to complete a master planning process, which really studies options and feasibility, and also gathers a lot of community feedback in the process. We started that process in the fall of 2019, convened an advisory group that was inclusive of Portland Public Schools, Portland, the PIL, the athletic staff, Portland Parks, because they are either full or co-owners on all the property we were talking about, and then PPS staff here that works with our real estate leases. In that process, we had 3 advisory group meetings with kind of a smaller group, although they were all open to the public. We also convened 2 community workshops. At our first community workshop, I believe there was over 100 people in attendance. In the second, there was probably well over 60. And at all of those meetings, we always presented 2 options. And we were clear in the community meeting from December 3rd that we were presenting or addressing the master plan, which was what we were directed to look at, which placed softball in the bowl, but that we had also had a lot of support for the second option, which was having softball in the upper field. And all of that was presented at the time. The boards were there for, public comment and whatnot. So after that meeting, we had one more advisory group meeting and then did the work for cost estimating and developing a staff report and that type of thing. So we have not been back out since the end of December. Regarding what happens next, we feel that the master planning process addressed most of the standard items involved in a master plan. We do know that this project, because it includes lights, is going to trigger what's called a type 3 land use, conditional land use process. That is also a very public process. We anticipate that we will be given guidelines around lighting, guidelines around noise, guidelines around use through that process. And so we are hoping to take that forward so that we can do that work and find what works best for the school, the parks, and the neighborhood. Same with traffic. So traffic studies, we had a traffic consultant that worked with us who also worked on the modernization. Traffic studies are typically done in concert with the land use review process. So that would also be undertaken at that time.
Thank you. Do we have any further discussion?
So this is a step back, a little bit bigger question. So all of the high school modernizations we've had have included a basic facility or a stadium for student use at the school. And there was a point in time at one point with Franklin when we were getting close to the end of the budget where there was a suggestion of not putting in the bleachers, but just putting in the posts for at least on the visitor side as a way to save money. And the decision was made that all students at the high schools in Portland deserved at least sort of this basic feature at their school, which in most schools, thousands of students are using across the seasons. So my question is, I know tonight's just phase 1, but I'm curious, is phase 2 going into the 2020 bond, or and I don't know who's going to answer this question, but if we don't put it in the 2020 bond, Grant will be the only high school in which we've done an upgrade or a modernization school without doing at least the sort of centralized feature. So I'm curious, and I don't know if that's a question for Deputy Superintendent Hertz, or you're free to answer it, but I have a sense maybe that would be a... So we're just getting, I think, a little bit over $1 million part of it, and there's a larger piece that would be make Grant have what's comparable to the other high schools.
Yeah, the opportunity with having softball on the upper field is to do a phased approach. The second phase would have to be funded from another source. There isn't. It's roughly $11 to $12 million for that scope of work. There isn't available funding right now to complete that level of capital improvement. It could be part of a future bond program, but of course those decisions will have to be made and ultimately will be made by the board.
Was that in the, was it originally all the high schools, so for example, the ones we just approved over the last 2 years, Lincoln, Madison, Benson. Well, Benson actually is a asterisk. We'll get to that. But they all have full, like, a stadium setup, and so it would be the only comprehensive, and if we didn't put it in the bond or identify some other source, then potentially we'd have Grant with a pretty big missing piece of their larger campus.
Yeah, I believe it is correct that Grant, other than Benson, is the only Portland high school that doesn't have bleachers around their field. Roosevelt, didn't get upgrades to their field or their bleachers, but they had them existing.
So it's 12 million.
Approximately, yes.
Approximately. So when other people are done with the questions, I just have something I want to say about the project.
Okay, does anyone have any other questions about the Grant Bowl?
Well, I kind of want to come back to my question, which is, I think what's on the table is great, and good process is important too. And I think it's a different process to say, hey, come look at our options and weigh in, is different than, here's our recommendation, what do you think? So I'm again want to say, if we said, let's give a little more, let's give the neighborhood association a shot at weighing in on a final or recommendation, makes sense at this point.
So for me, I'm gonna vote yes on this tonight, and I appreciated Jamie's point about the conditional, or Marina's point about the conditional use process coming up, which I think is designed to address specifically the concerns that the neighbors are bringing forward tonight, and I know it to be a very rigorous process within the city of Portland. I'm comfortable with that tonight. I want to just go back though and to the underlying issue, and Coach Engelstadt, thank you for your 34 years of service, and I want to apologize that softball was not given due consideration along with baseball at the outset of all of this planning. And this is a huge part of our bond program to make sure that this capital reinvestment in our athletic facilities ensures equity for boys and girls sports across the district. So thank you for persevering, but I'm sorry that you had to, and your students. And it's going to be awesome. Yeah. They all have learned a lot. Yeah. I'm sorry you had to, but thank you for your advocacy. And the other bigger point that I wanted to make is that you mentioned that one of the reasons it was not included in the original plan was because it wasn't existing prior. And this is unfortunately a problem, a systemic problem that we have in our educational specifications. Lincoln's dealing with severe inequities in their athletic facilities right now, because the design process didn't start from square one to look at what a student athletes need. And they said, we're only going to replace the facilities that are already there. And of course, Lincoln's a challenging situation because it's in the middle of the city and there's not very much land, but there was very little creativity applied to the problem at the time. So I think that bigger issue is something that needs to be addressed in our educational specifications.
So I'm going to support this tonight as well, but I will speak to the three issues that the neighbors brought up. And I'm going to support it because I'm going to go back to 1972 with Title IX, which established the obligation for us to provide equitable facilities and opportunities for both genders. In 1977, I played in the first PIL softball team that when they started offering it as a sport for high school girls. And I'm going to go back to when I first, right before I got on the board the first time in 2000, I think one of the first community events I went to was a discussion about the facilities at Grant and the real complications that exist by having a facility that is sort of used intensely as if it's a school facility by the school community, and at the same time it's part of the parks and you have this joint process. So that's 19 years ago when I went to my first meeting about how do we adequately support student athletes in the Grant community. So it's been a long conversation. And I, breaks my heart to hear the, playing on a football striped T-ball field, because our students deserve better. And I will say, for the neighborhood, I think it's completely reasonable that we provide the seasons and hours, and we can do that. For the teams, having seen some of the complicated matrix that are required, I think people will be surprised, even if you're super efficient, moving people on and off fields, which I believe our staff will do, that I can't foresee that you can't have lights. No other high school is able to do it. And I've heard from Grant's students about the inability to play in their home fields because they don't have that capability. I think the issue relating to parks adding on additional hours is a real issue, and I think that's an issue that the school district could have a conversation in addition with. We don't control that, but because they do their own programming, but that we could be a partner in that conversation about what that looks like. So I think that's a reasonable thing to ask. It's not something necessarily, though, that we can tell the city what that entails, but I think we can be a partner with the neighborhood. And in terms of mitigation strategies, I think that is a reasonable thing to ask, and can be built into the part of the process as we move forward, because I live 2 feet from a park on 2 sides of my house, and there's great benefits to living next to a park and a public facility, and also it comes with some other things that sometimes mitigation strategies are needed. So I think that is a very reasonable thing to ask, and would hope that this district can be a really good partner with the neighbors, because I think that's what we aspire to be. So I'm going to be a yes.
All right. The board will now vote. Oh, one more.
My question has not been answered. Would pushing it back to a March 17th board meeting decision materially impact our timeline on getting this done for not this spring, obviously, but for next spring?
I'll let Jamie jump in here, but I think we would need to take a look at that. It's not something that we had considered before right now. So it's something that we could take a look at. It might not change the overall outcome. We're generally looking at construction in summer of 2021, but there is a lot of process between now and then. And I would also submit that the approval tonight, I don't think would impact any of the conversations that we're having. I agree also that the requests are fair. I think we can work through all those issues. There's lots of variables that still need to be worked out between now and when we have land use approval, when we have building permit approval, negotiating with Portland Parks and Rec. All those things will happen over the course of this project. And so I think they're all doable, but specific to the question about timing, I think we need a little bit of time to take a look at that.
And I think whether or not, even if the resolution is approved tonight, I think it would be a good idea to have an open house or meet with neighbors within the next month to let them know what the next steps are and where the engagement can happen and how the public process will continue. So,
Superintendent Guerrero, can we ask you to direct staff to see that happens? Some opportunity to...
I think it's been clear from testimony tonight that there's an appetite for more of it. I think you're hearing staff acknowledge that, and so that's something we would make sure to have occur.
Okay, great.
So I want to acknowledge, I went to both open houses. They're really, really good process that you guys ran, very well attended. There was a nice station on lighting and how modern lighting can really be shielded in ways and focused in ways that really minimize impact. I also have this kind of nervous tick about, are we building lights that Parks is going to benefit from, even though we're paying the money, and that will impact the neighborhood because Parks will do that because Parks can do that. And you know, we've had issues before where we end up paying the money, Parks gets the benefits, and what the heck? I do not want to go down that road one more time. So if there are lights, I think we ought to control when they're on and who gets to use them. And I think that's an important discussion to have with the neighborhood.
All right, the board will now vote on Resolution 6058, authorizing the Grant Bowl Master Plan. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Resolution 6058 is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Lattarell voting.
Yes.
All right, okay, go Generals, have a great season. Okay, tonight the board will hear updates from our 4 board committees and 1 task force, and I will also provide a brief report on my participation at the Linked Learning Conference last month. Director Moore, would you like to start it off with a report from the Policy Committee and the Intergovernmental Task Force?
I'm going to start with the Policy Committee. It'll be fairly short. We are we're working on a meals policy, reimbursement for meals, and a meals policy. And we have made a couple of changes. I think it's ready to come back and hopefully will be approved for forwarding to the board at our next meeting, which is March 9th. The major work that we're doing right now is looking at the 3 policies that are related to the enrollment balancing work. And we've gotten some feedback from community engagement sessions. We're talking about we're talking about making some revisions to the language. All 3 of the policies we're going to be looking at adding language that aligns with the racial educational equity policy language. And then we're looking at changing some practices around particularly when any boundary changes would take effect. My expectation is that it's going to require a number of sessions before we complete the revisions there. The next thing is Intergovernmental Task Force, and you'll be pleased to know that there are discussions that are happening with Portland Parks and Rec that will hopefully lead to a revised collaborative agreement, and there have been some changes in Portland Parks and Rec relatively recently, and there have been changes on our end as well. The existing collaborative agreement is rather old, and I don't remember exactly when it dates from.
Not sure.
But it's been in place for a good long time, and practices are not necessarily aligned with the existing agreement. So.
That's a nice way to say that.
I try.
I've heard the agreement is older than our portables.
It could be. So there is ongoing work happening to craft an agreement that is going to work for both PPS and Portland Parks and Rec. I don't have a date when that work will be concluded, but we have been, the board members, Amy and I, have been talking to staff about the issues that we're aware of that have made for a somewhat tense relationship over the years. So we're getting ongoing updates on how that's going. So we got some legislative updates, most of which were stay tuned, and since things have come to a screeching halt, it appears. I think we'll all just have to stay tuned. The other major thing that we did at the meeting was to get a report on district sustainability efforts. And this is directly relevant to some of the testimony we heard earlier. There's a great deal of work going on. And PPS has a pretty good track record on sustainability. And it's, we're adding to it all the time. And one of the really positive efforts that is going on right now is we now have a real infrastructure within the district around sustainability, so they're actively engaged in some work across departments to improve practices around sustainability, and it's kind of a work in progress, but it sounded very, very promising. And
I would just add to that, back to the testimony of our friends from Beverly Cleary. Nutrition Services is deeply engaged in looking at single-use plastics and all sorts of aspects of their practices, and engaged with students and school leaders too on how to continually improve there. So that was good to learn more about.
Is there a one-pager bullet points stuff that we're engaged in doing?
We actually did receive something for that meeting, so it's posted with the materials, but Roseanne can resend that around. Director Scott, could you provide a report?
Before we move off that topic, I was just going to say, there seems to be like a disconnect between, I agree that there's a lot of great work being done, but it seems like whenever we got to engage students, it's not connected to them somehow, and it seems like we have such a pull market, and the excitement. I mean, last year when the kids came and brought the beeswax wraps instead of single-use plastic, and then going out to Bridger for the announcement of the sustainability grant from PGE. I just see all this enthusiasm for students, and somehow if we can connect the good work that's happening internally with the student energy, it's just like I think great things would be happening. The students would be less frustrated because there are many things happening. So if you can illuminate that somehow or elevate the work.
So Maxine is still here, but there is a student committee now that is part of the. It's all right. I was just going to refer to you. You didn't have to come back. Do you want to say something quickly about the student work with the Climate Justice Committee?
I don't have extensive knowledge of the student. I don't know exactly what it's called.
Except that there is a subset of students that are working.
There is a subset of students that are working with Nicole and working with Sarah on the curriculum stuff, and also just as a group to be.
But part of what they're looking at is also, as a district and as an employer, our own sustainability practices.
I wish that we could have shown the students that the reason we have these glasses tonight is because students came in and asked us not to use disposable water bottles. And I agree that we should probably do some more messaging. And I'm also curious if there's someone I could connect with at the district that's kind of the point person for either facilities or operations, because I actually have a checklist I could share that they could just kind of tick off some of the things that are already being done. And so we could better message those things.
We do have a director of sustainability. Roseanne can connect you. Yeah.
So can I just...
Is that person's facilities and operations, or?
I believe he's in facilities and asset management.
Yeah.
But he is tasked with working across departments on all these activities.
It sounds like a brief, high-level synopsis of where we are in our sustainability and green efforts, because some of these important topics, have been explored, are continuing to be explored. Things as simple as having durable lunch materials, utensils, depends on whether there's dishwashing capabilities in that school. So in some cases, we've been able to help with that. So, but I think there's a whole range of other things, including a progress report on our resolution implementation. So let's see about putting something brief together, just a quick, FYI, and then I do think it should just be a regular practice to have an annual report on our sustainability efforts and the resolution specifically. But I agree, sometimes our students aren't hearing the progress that we're making in many ways along different fronts, whether it's energy or any other area.
So one of the other things that came up during the meeting was, can we highlight what we're doing on our website? And the answer that we got was, yeah, it's in there, but you gotta look for it. And if there's a way to sort of raise the visibility, I think that would be helpful.
Could board members would like to see that link?
Roseanne, you can get that back out to all of us, I believe. Thank you. Okay, Director Scott, waiting here to provide your report from the School Improvement Bond
So
Committee.
thank you. A lot going on in the School Improvement Bond Committee. Over the last couple of weeks, we had a meeting on February 13th where we discussed the facility condition assessment reviews. We discussed educational sustainability review. We got an update from the Bond Accountability Committee, overview of the water pilot program, and a preview of the Grant Bowl decision, which the board made today. And then as an entire board, we met in a work session on February 18th to, again, review some of the facility condition assessments, review potential bond options for the 2020 bond this November, and then really engage in a pretty robust discussion of criteria that we'd like staff to use as they develop the 2020 bond. So again, good conversation. Staff is taking that input and will come back to us with a next iteration of bond package options. And I think we're going to be discussing, we have a next bond committee meeting on March 12th, and then a potential full board work session on March 17th. So lots going on, lots of discussion as we move towards the 2020 bond.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Director Lowry, Director Lowry, could you provide an update from Charter and Alternative Programs, where there is also a lot going on?
Yes, it's interesting because most people normally mess up my first name, not my last name, but thank you for asking about the work of the Charter and Alternative Program Committee. We held a hearing on February 13th. It was a very busy day for Chair Constam, as she was both at the bond meeting and then at the hearing, as was Director Bailey at both. So we had that hearing where we heard from the community and from Kairos and Portland Village School as we looked at renewals of both of those charters. And then we had a work session on February 20th for the Charter Schools and Alternative Programs Committee, where we made recommendations that will be coming before the board for our March 3rd meeting to vote on those charter renewals and the extensions of two others, Opal School and Arthur Academy. We also have been working with our community CBOs, and I see Tom and Joe are here, as well as some other CBO folks, to talk tonight about the SAA and increasing our support of our CBOs and that work of conversation and engagement as we continue to make sure we're serving well those students who need extra supports. And so I'm thankful that they're here tonight to continue that work and that conversation and the work of the committee. One of the things in your packet was a memo around increasing the pass-through. Currently, state of Oregon law is that we pass through 80% of the dollars for charter schools, and we are looking at increasing that to 95% for schools that serve 50% or more historically underserved students. So you have a staff analysis in your packet that we will be bringing forward for a vote also at our March 3rd meeting, and that came out of conversations that both Chair Constam and I had with some of the schools, and Director Bailey was part of that conversation as well, as we looked at what would the impact be of, again, making sure that our students who need the most supports and resources have those. So that's everything from the Charter and Alternative Program Committee.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership there in the extension and renewal process, which is a lot of work. Director Brim Edwards, do you have a report from the Audit Committee?
Excuse me. We recently had an audit committee. As a refresher, we have three members of the board and then 2 community members who serve on the board. At high level, the topics that we covered, we had a report from the internal performance auditor, and we have a project underway right now, which is to gather all the disparate audits that happen across the district, whether they're internal, external, financial, bond, and to try and get them in one place. because you have to go all over the place to find them. And then, more importantly, a lot of the audits have had recommendations for the districts on how we can improve our operations. And so we're in the process of pairing the district reports on implementation and on the recommendations and the implementation progress, so that community members could see the outcome of the audits, what recommendations have been made, and then what progress is happening vis-a-vis the various audits, because there are a lot of audits happening right now. In addition, we had a discussion about potential fraud hotline, and this was something that, again, the internal performance auditor, Janice Hansen, brought. And while we discussed the benefits of it, I think there was a consensus that we're in the process of standing up the internal performance audit, Office of the Internal Performance Audit, and we have lots of audits underway. We have Secretary of State's audit that at this time, that's not something that we should entertain as something that's needed, because we have a lot of other audits and we're still in the process of really getting the internal audit office stood up. We also had a brief report from the bond performance audit. They're engaged in field work right now relating to the current bond. There's five primary areas they're looking at: contracts and procurement, health and safety, construction management, and prior audit recommendations follow-up. And that the field work's underway, so they have nothing to report at this time. We should see significantly more reporting on the health and safety side of things. So last year was a lot on the modernizations, and this year there will be, I think, more information on the health and safety, which will be, I think, useful information for our broader community. Then the committee also considered a staff recommendation on a contract extension for our comprehensive annual financial auditor, and we're recommending TKW, and I believe that recommendation will come to the board at the next meeting. They've done a good job, and staff presented a number of reasons of why it would be to the district's advantage to continue. So that'll be coming to the full board with a recommendation from the committee. And then lastly, we had a discussion about the Secretary of State audit, and there has been a report, an implementation scorecard created so that, again, people don't have to wade through all the audits and long spreadsheets to figure out whether or not we're on track to implement. And so we talked about that, and part of the discussion was around how there are some very specific items that are board related, and some of them we've completed, some of them are underway, and then there's some that we still have to do. And so we had a discussion somewhat philosophical about how it is that we're going to, as a board, report on some things that we were assigned as part of the audit. So it was a good discussion. I say we have a scorecard that is, I think, pretty straightforward and understandable to the public about where we are in terms of implementation, and the staff items are well underway.
Thank you very much. Excuse me? That was the audit committee, yep. To round it out, I have a report from a brief excursion I was able to make to Long Beach Unified School District with some of our staff to look at their linked learning, which is really a CTE focus of all their high schools, but it's also so much more than that. That's really integrated project-based learning throughout their high schools, and connecting their core curriculum to their career pathways in their high schools, which really, really increases the relevance for students, and it's had a huge impact on their graduation rate. So it was a lot to learn. It was really especially illuminating for me to be there with some of our staff. We had teachers from Madison and Wilson and Lincoln who were really impressed and interested and fired up about bringing home some of their learnings from there. And tonight on our business agenda, we approved for Director DePass to visit Nashville, which has a similar linked learning approach with their high school academies. And so this is all part of our ongoing efforts to improve our career pathways for our students and also just improve the relevance in our core curriculum. So I appreciate the opportunity to have gone on that learning journey with some of our staff. And seeing no other business, we will adjourn and reconvene in a board work session to discuss our student investment account priorities. Thank you all so much. We are adjourned.